Madison Square Garden. January 1971. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, the fight of the century. Every seat in the building filled, every ringside table occupied by the most powerful men in New York. Senators, mob bosses, film stars, and sitting directly at ringside in a $125,000 chinchilla coat and matching hat with his wife in matching fur beside him. A black man from a dirt-poor farm in North Carolina who had, without a single business school degree or a single legitimate investor, built the most profitable drug distribution operation in the history of Harlem. The DEA noticed, the whole city noticed, that coat was the moment Frank Lucas stopped being a secret. While every other Harlem drug dealer was spending their money on the block they controlled, visible, local, containable, Frank Lucas was doing something completely different. He was buying ranches in North Carolina, apartments in Los Angeles, Miami, and Puerto Rico, office buildings in Detroit, properties in multiple states, under multiple names, purchased through family members who the DEA had not yet identified as connected. At his peak in the early 1970s, DEA agents estimated his personal fortune at $52 million, the equivalent of over $500 million in today's money. He made, by some accounts, over $1 million a day. Today, we are telling the full story of the luxurious life of Frank Lucas, the American gangster. Where the money came from, what it built, how he spent it, and what happened when one $125,000 chinchilla coat attracted the attention of the one room full of people he could not afford to notice him. Stay locked in until the end, because we are breaking down the DEA raid on Frank Lucas's Teaneck, New Jersey mansion that changed everything. When agents entered that house in 1975, they found $600,000 in cash, the equivalent of over $3.6 million in today's money, in a single morning's search. That was what was in the house that day. The $52 million the DEA estimated was his true fortune was somewhere else entirely, in Cayman Islands bank accounts, in real estate held under other names, on a 7,000-acre ranch in North Carolina that nobody had connected to a Harlem heroin dealer. Yet, we are going chapter by chapter, from a sharecropper's son in rural North Carolina who left home at 15 with nothing but rage and ambition, to the man who bypassed the Italian mob, flew to Southeast Asia during a war, built the purest heroin supply chain in American history, and for 4 years lived a life so lavish it was impossible to sustain and impossible to hide. Chapter 1. The origin, Lagrange to Harlem, and the education. Bumpy Johnson never charged for. Frank Lucas was born on September 9, 1930, in Lagrange, North Carolina, a town so small and so poor that most of its black residents lived within the same economic architecture of sharecropping that had defined Southern black life since the end of slavery. His childhood was not defined by opportunity withheld. It was defined by violence normalized. When he was a boy, he watched the Ku Klux Klan murder his 12-year-old cousin for the crime of looking at a white woman. No arrest was made, no justice was available, no institution existed that was designed to protect him or his family from what they had just witnessed. Frank Lucas internalized that lesson completely. In the world he had been born into, the rules were written by the people with the weapons, and the only way to change your position was to become the person with the weapons. At 15, he struck a man with a pipe, stole $400, set the man's business on fire, and left North Carolina for Harlem. He was not running toward anything. He was running away from a future that had already been decided for him. In Harlem, Lucas gravitating toward the orbit of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the most respected black organized crime figure in New York, was inevitable. Whether Lucas served as Johnson's driver for 15 years as he claimed, or whether their relationship was less formal than that, what is clear is that Johnson operated as a finishing school for a generation of Harlem's most ambitious men. He taught Lucas the most important lesson of organized crime, that the money is never in the product, it is in the supply chain. Whoever controls the pipeline from source to street earns at every level. Whoever buys from a middleman earns at only one. Johnson died in 1968, and the void he left created the opportunity that Frank Lucas had been, whether consciously or not, preparing his entire adult life to fill. After Johnson's death, Frank Lucas did something that no major Harlem drug figure had done before him. He got on a plane and flew to Southeast Asia. He traveled to Thailand, made his way to the Golden Triangle, the mountainous region straddling Thailand, Laos, and Burma that produced the majority of the world's heroin supply, and introduced himself directly to the producers. He paid $4,300 a kilogram for heroin at source. That same kilogram, cut and distributed through the existing New York supply chain, was worth $300,000 on the Harlem street. The Italian families who controlled New York's heroin market at the time were buying from Southeast Asian suppliers through multiple intermediaries, each one taking a cut that inflated the price and compressed the margin. Lucas cut out every single one of them. He brought the product directly from the mountain to the street, and the product he brought was different from anything New York had seen, nearly pure heroin, sold under the brand name Blue Magic, at a price that undercut every competitor in the city and a potency that no competitor could match. At the peak of his operation, Frank Lucas earned by his own account and by DEA estimates over $1 million a day. He trusted no one outside his own family, a network of relatives from North Carolina who he brought to New York and installed as his distribution infrastructure. He called them the Country Boys. The DEA, when they eventually mapped his network, described it as one of the most disciplined and internally secure drug distribution organizations they had ever encountered. No contracts, no paper, no middle management who could be flipped. Just family, cash, and product that sold itself because it was the purest heroin on the street. At his peak, Frank Lucas had turned a $4,300 kilogram purchase into a $300,000 street-level product, and he was moving multiple kilograms per week. The math, for a few years, was extraordinary. Frank Lucas did not live in Harlem while he ran Harlem. He lived in Teaneck, New Jersey, a quiet, predominantly white suburb across the Hudson River, where the houses had driveways and the neighbors were doctors and accountants. The choice was deliberate. Lucas understood something that many of his contemporaries did not. The most dangerous thing a wealthy black man in early 1970s America could do was to be visibly wealthy in the neighborhood where he was making his money. He needed distance between the life and the livelihood. The Teaneck mansion was where he slept, where his wife Julie kept their home, and where, when DEA agents arrived in 1975, they found $600,000 in cash that had not yet been moved. At his peak, Frank Lucas's real estate portfolio spanned 6 states and the Caribbean. The centerpiece was a 7,000-acre ranch in North Carolina, the kind of land his family had sharecropped for generations, now his outright, stocked with 300 Black Angus cattle and a breeding bull he paid $125,000 for. He owned apartments in Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, and Puerto Rico. He held commercial office space in Detroit. He drove Rolls-Royces and custom Cadillacs. He wore custom-tailored suits from the finest shops in New York. And on the night of the most watched boxing match in New York City's history, he sat ringside at Madison Square Garden in a full-length chinchilla fur coat with a matching hat, the coat alone valued at $125,000, with his wife beside him in a matching chinchilla set. The entire outfit cost more than most Harlem families earned in a decade, and the entire arena could see it. The financial architecture Frank Lucas built around his fortune was, by the standards of his era, sophisticated. The bulk of his estimated $52 million net worth, confirmed by DEA accounting during the investigation, was held in Cayman Islands bank accounts, inaccessible to American investigators under the banking secrecy laws of the time. Real estate was purchased under the names of family members with no criminal records, making property seizure legally complicated. Cash was moved through multiple hands before it reached a bank account. Lucas had effectively built a two-tier financial system. the visible lifestyle, which announced his wealth, and the invisible infrastructure, which protected it. The visible lifestyle was the mistake. The chinchilla coat at Madison Square Garden, broadcast in photographs across every newspaper in New York the following morning, was the moment the DEA's intelligence operation shifted from background interest to active priority target. The life Frank Lucas built in those 4 or 5 years at the top was not simply extravagant, it was, in the specific historical context of a black man in early 1970s America, an act of defiance so total that it required a response from every system that was supposed to prevent it. He sat ringside at Ali vs. Frazier in a $125,000 coat when most black men in America could not get a mortgage for a house worth that amount. He owned 7,000 acres in North Carolina, in a state where black land ownership had been systematically stripped away for a century, and he stocked it with cattle. He built a financial infrastructure sophisticated enough to hide $52 million from the most aggressive federal law enforcement agency in the country. The life was insane. The audacity that produced it was something else entirely. The chinchilla coat was a $125,000 mistake that cost Frank Lucas everything he had built. After photographs from the Ali Frazier fight circulated through New York's newspapers and entertainment press, DEA Special Agent Richie Roberts, who had been building a case on Harlem's heroin trade for years, saw the images and asked the question that started the collapse: who is that man? And where does his money come from? Lucas had been operating successfully, in part because he had been invisible to the federal investigation. He was not connected to the Italian families the DEA was already watching. He was not part of the established distribution networks they had already mapped. He was an unknown with a direct line to Southeast Asia and a family distribution network that had left almost no footprint. The coat put his face in the newspaper, and once his face was in the newspaper, it was only a matter of time. In January 1975, DEA agents raided Frank Lucas's Teaneck, New Jersey home and found $600,000 in cash, a number that, in 2025 dollars, represents over $3.6 million. He was convicted of heroin trafficking in 1976 and sentenced to 70 years in federal prison. The sentence was reduced significantly after he cooperated with federal investigators, providing information that led to the conviction of dozens of corrupt law enforcement officers who had been on his payroll or who had been taking bribes to protect his operation. The cooperation was the most consequential decision of his life, more consequential even than the chinchilla coat. It got him out of prison in 1981 after 5 years. It also exposed the full financial architecture of his empire: the Cayman Islands accounts, the North Carolina ranch, the properties held under family members' names, and allowed the government to seize or forfeit nearly everything he had built. The financial destruction that followed Frank Lucas's arrest is as instructive as the financial construction that preceded it. The DEA estimated his fortune at $52 million at his peak, equivalent to over $500 million in today's money. At the time of his death, in 2019, his net worth was approximately $500,000. The gap between those two numbers, $52 million to $500,000 across 50 years, is the story of what happens when the financial architecture of a criminal enterprise collapses under the weight of federal cooperation, asset forfeiture, and the specific legal mechanisms that 1970s prosecutors had been building specifically to dismantle operations like his. The offshore accounts were accessed, the properties were seized, the ranch was lost, the cattle were gone. The chinchilla coat, which had started the whole cascade, presumably ended up in the federal government's evidence storage. What remained was the story. And the story, when Ridley Scott turned it into a film starring Denzel Washington in 2007, generated more money than almost anything Frank Lucas had made in the years when he was trying to hide it. American Gangster made $266 million at the worldwide box office. Frank Lucas received a payment for his cooperation with the film's production, and served as a consultant. He sat in screenings and watched Denzel Washington wear a recreation of the $125,000 chinchilla coat that had destroyed his empire, and described the experience publicly as strange, surreal, and humbling. He lived until May 30th, 2019, 88 years old, in a New Jersey that no longer had a mansion in it for him, with a net worth that was a rounding error compared to what he had once held. He gave interviews, he disputed parts of the film, he maintained that the coffin smuggling story was fiction, and that he used furniture instead, a claim the DEA later supported. He had been, for a window of time in the early 1970s, one of the wealthiest self-made black men in America. The method was illegal, the destruction was total, and the life, while it lasted, was absolutely insane. From a dirt road in LaGrange, North Carolina, where the Klan operated without consequence and a black boy's life was worth nothing to the people in charge of protecting it, to $125,000 of chinchilla fur at ringside for the fight of the century. A $52 million fortune hidden across 6 states and the Cayman Islands, and a 7,000-acre ranch in the state that had kept his family in poverty for generations. Frank Lucas built the most luxurious life available to a man of his background in early 1970s America. He built it illegally, he lost it completely, and he left behind a story so cinematic that Hollywood paid $266 million tickets worth of audiences to watch a version of it. So tell us in the comments, which moment in this story hit hardest? The chinchilla coat at Madison Square Garden, the $125,000 flex that started the collapse, the 7,000-acre North Carolina ranch, a sharecropper's grandson buying more land than his family had ever seen, or the fall, $52 million to $500,000 in 50 years because of one photograph in a newspaper. Drop it below right now.